Lord George Goring became governor of Portsmouth in 1639, following what was described as a colourful life in public and in private. He is described by Earl Clarendon as an untrustworthy man whose principal practice is dissimulation so good that people rarely blamed themselves for being taken in by him twice. As the King's diarist, Clarendon may have sought to paint him in a bad light. He wasn't the only one. Oglander describes an occasion where Goring visited Newport on the Isle of Wight, and with a couple of friends marched drunkenly through the town to the gallows, arriving with clothes in tatters. His biographer, though, Nemegallus, points out his critics' biases, as she paints a much better image of him. Before the Civil War began, Goring had responsibility for deciding which side Portsmouth would take, and he was playing both sides against the middle. He convinced the king he was loyal, and received money from the Queen, who sold some of her plates to raise £3,000 to give him so that he could strengthen Portsmouth's fortifications. He also convinced Parliament he supported their cause, and received money from them to achieve exactly the same purpose. His true position became clear when he declared for the king on the 2nd of August 1642, annoying the king in the process, who was planning to raise his standard at York and get the Civil War off to its official start. Unfortunately, he also annoyed Parliament, who promptly responded by sending troops to ensure the town's armoury was brought under their own control. In response, Goring sent 20 armed horsemen and 4 cannon from the Henrietta Maria to Portsbridge, with orders to guard it day and night. The Royal Navy had already declared for Parliament by this time, and the Earl of Warwick with 5 ships was ordered to move and block seaborne supply routes by occupying Spithead. He arrived on the 8th of August, a few days after supplies from the Isle of Wight had stopped being sent to Portsmouth. By 10th of August, Sir William Waller arrived and began occupying Portsdown Hill, intercepting Royalist supporters as they sought to get food and weapons to Goring. Eventually, Waller's troops were locking the only bridge onto Portsea Island, and Goring subsequently removed the 4 guns guarding the bridge and took them back to Portsmouth. One of the 4 cannon broke a wheel and was abandoned. That left a dozen or so men with pistols to guard Portsbridge itself, blocking parliamentary troops from getting onto the island. A messenger from the king did get through, bringing a letter advising the king was sending reinforcements and other help. The garrison increased by 500 men the day after this news arrived. And Goring wasn't in any way abandoned by his supporters. Arms and ammunition were sent, and Bishop Curl of Winchester sent 5 fully armed horsemen. However, all of these efforts were intercepted by the besieging forces. With land and sea supply routes blocked, Goring sent troops out to take food and animals from all around the island. This wasn't a friendly action. His troops took everything, even half-eaten loaves, leaving the inhabitants to starve. Owners of animals were obliged to take their animals into Portsmouth, where their animals were confiscated and their owners promptly pressed into the defence of the town. The Earl of Warwick responded by sending part of his blocking force to the northeast of Portsea Island, and landed a couple of his ship's guns. These held off the plundering horsemen while women and children were taken off, along with 200 sheep and 100 cattle. The cattle had ropes tied around their horse, forcing them to swim after the boats as they made their way to Hayling Island. At around 6 p.m. on the 12th of August, the very heavy rain that persisted for the last couple of days came to an end, and 20 parliamentarians crossed Portsbridge, unsure of what they were going to meet. In a short time, they had captured 1 man out of the 8-man guard. The rest had run away. They also captured 1 horse, its rider having jumped from his horse and ran away through the hedges. Parliament had now secured the whole of Portsea Island and set a guard on the bridge. But they hadn't finished fighting to take Portsmouth. Parliament's efforts to block supplies to Portsmouth by land led to the diversion of 125 quarts of wheat en route to Portsmouth. Goring was so enraged by this action that he threatened the bombardment of Gosport with Portsmouth cannon. He was entreated by all concerned to desist from doing this, due to the harm it would cause to women and children living in Gosport. He eventually forced a cannoneer to fire on Gosport after threatening to run a sword through him if he did not. The cannoneer complied, but fired over the town, causing little harm to anyone. On the 15th of August, a group of captains believed it would be dangerous, but possible, to steal the Henrietta Maria from Portsmouth harbour. That night, under cover of darkness, Captain Bushell took several longboats into Portsmouth harbour and boarded the Henrietta Maria, forcing the crew and soldiers below decks. Making sail, the Henrietta Maria began to stand out from the harbour, and once clear of the town's guns, she hailed 2 ships loaded with corn bound for Portsmouth. Both struck their colours immediately, and Goring had now just lost the only warship he had in his possession. After a prolonged period of cannon fire from Portsmouth, troops at Gosport set up 2 cannon and hid them behind wooden barriers. They started firing on Portsmouth, particularly against the church because its belfry was being used as a lookout. They did considerable damage. Moving their aim later in the morning, they fired upon the mill. The miller was glad he got out of bed early that morning because the cannon shot hit and shattered his bed. After 2 days of firing, the 2 Gosport cannon had done more damage than Portsmouth 14 cannon had managed to achieve. Throughout all of this, the respected forces weren't idle. Goring sent Lord Wentworth out with around 60 troopers armed with guns and bullets to recover the abandoned ship's gun. A parliamentary horse trooper got between the gun and Portsmouth, firing on Wentworth's troops. The ship's gun was nevertheless recovered. On the same day, Colonel Norton took troops close to Portsmouth, aiming to capture the mill that was grinding corn for the town's garrison. One of his number lost his hat, another lost his sword, and a few cannon shot came their way, but caused very little harm. On another day, Goring had sent a troop of horse out to harass Waller, but was soundly repulsed and chased back to Portsmouth by a Scotsman, who continued fighting through the gates and into Portsmouth itself, when the gates were closed behind him, making him a prisoner. Goring, however, appreciated his bravery and procured the best medical treatment, gave him 3 gold pieces and sent him back in a prisoner exchange. On the 3rd of September, Colonel Norton decided to attack the strongest castle in the country when it had been built by Henry VIII. The castle's commanding officer, a Captain Challenger, was in Portsmouth in a heavy drinking session with Goring and began his return on the 4th of September loaded with provisions. However, on the night of the 3rd, the castle was occupied by only 12 soldiers. Norton attacked with 400 troops, carrying 20 or 30 scaling ladders. The guns at Gosport started a diversion cannonade at around 2 a.m, killing a couple of the town's occupants. By 3 a.m, Norton had got between the castle and the sea, whilst all the castle's guns faced inland. Major Harbert, Captain Bushell, and a trumpeter approached the gate and moat, sounding for a parley, offering fair quarter to the garrison. When the castle's governor, still drunk, procrastinated, the parliamentarian troops scaled the walls and took the castle without loss of life. Challenger now shared drinks with his captors and requested they fired a couple of shots towards Portsmouth to indicate the castle had been taken. Goring responded with heavy cannonade to the castle, reaching the drawbridge, though causing no harm. By this time, many of the town's garrison had left, and only around 60 people were left in the town, mostly gentlemen with servants, almost none of whom knew how to fire a gun or operate cannon. Goring had seen through a telescope that there were 10 guns readied at Gosport. This prompted him to call a council of war, resulting in a call to parley at 10 a.m. Negotiations lasted until 5 p.m, but weren't signed off until 7 p.m. The surrender terms were generous. Goring and his commanders, along with their retinue, were free to leave after a few days putting their affairs in order. The town's garrison had free passes to leave the town with limited arms and horses to any place of their own choosing, so long as they do not join an army against Parliament. Free passes were granted without arms to those who wanted to cross the sea. All deserters were granted an amnesty, apart from those who had deserted from Parliament's army. The town's armouries were to be left intact. One of the reasons Parliament granted such generous terms was Goring's threat to blow up the town's powder stores if Parliament attempted to take the town by forcible assault. Since there was sufficient powder to destroy the town and everybody in it, Parliament adopted the axiom that if your opponent has a golden bridge to leave, it's better to be merciful to the few, despite their offences, than to ruin all, whether innocent or innocent. At 6 a.m. on the 7th of September, 2 companies of Parliament's troops were posted in the town to maintain order and protect the magazines. Gore himself had bargained to be transported to Holland on board a king's ship, and left the evening of the surrender, throwing the keys to the town into the sea as he left.